Right in the middle of a lavish wedding, a poor soldier and his young daughter were driven away like complete strangers. No one spoke up. No one stood up for them. But 5 years later, that very girl who was cast out that day would make the entire town bow its head, bring the powerful crashing down, and force a mother to realize she had lost something no amount of money could ever buy. The October afternoon sunlight spilled across the facade of St. Catherine's Cathedral like ribbons of molten gold bathing the ancient Gothic stone in a sacred glow. Jake Miller stood outside the iron gates, his calloused hand clasping the small hand of Lily. The 5-year-old girl looked up at her father, her clear blue eyes reflecting the splendor of the cathedral before them. "Daddy, is this where Mommy is?" Lily asked, her voice as innocent as birdsong at dawn. Jake swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy is having a very special day." He glanced down at the faded green military uniform he was wearing, the jacket that had once filled him with pride, now reduced to frayed seams and patches dulled by countless washings. In his breast pocket lay a crumpled wedding invitation. Emily had sent it, or rather her assistant had, along with a brief note. "For Lily's sake, you may come to offer congratulations." Jake drew a deep breath. The battlefield had taught him courage, but walking into his former wife's wedding required a very different kind of bravery. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered. "We're going to give Mommy her gift." Each step Jake took left muddy footprints starkly out of place beside the polished heels of the guests who had entered before them. The massive oak doors stood wide open. Inside, the air was filled with candlelight and the fragrance of hundreds of white roses. Jake and Lily stepped inside, and it felt as though time itself froze. Faces turned from the pews. Silk evening gowns, bespoke Savile Row suits, glittering jewels all formed an invisible wall separating Jake from this world. A middle-aged woman in a wide-brimmed hat whispered to the person beside her, her lips barely moving. How did they let people like that in here? Jake heard every word. His grip tightened around his daughter's fingers. "Daddy, why is everyone looking at us?" Lily asked softly, her voice trembling. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're just here to congratulate Mommy." They made their way toward the back, finding a quiet corner. From there, Jake could see the altar where Emily stood beside Richard Dawson. She was radiant in her pure white wedding gown, layers of tulle floating like clouds. Her golden hair was swept into an elegant updo, a diamond tiara sparkling beneath the lights. Emily, the woman he had once promised to protect for a lifetime, now belonged to a world he was no longer allowed to touch. Richard Dawson stood beside her shoulders, squared in a flawless black suit, wearing the confident smile of a man born into privilege. The ceremony ended in thunderous applause. Emily and Richard walked down the aisle together, framed by shimmering candlelight. That was when Lily slipped free of Jake's hand. "Mommy, Mommy." Her clear voice rang out across the cathedral. The child ran toward Emily, holding up a small hand-knitted bracelet, the gift she had spent an entire week making. Emily stopped. Her beautiful face went blank, her smile extinguished like a candle in the wind. "Lily," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Richard frowned slightly, his gaze shifting from the child to Jake, standing in the distance. 1 second, 2 seconds, time seemed suspended. "Mommy, I made this for you," Lily said brightly, offering the bracelet. "Daddy said today is your special day." Richard raised his hand, the movement quick and cold. His hand brushed the bracelet aside. It fell into a pool of holy water spilled from a nearby font. Lily stood frozen, her clear eyes slowly clouding with tears. "Richard," Emily murmured, but she did nothing more. "I don't believe this occasion is appropriate for guests like these," Richard said politely, his tone icy. He signaled to 2 security guards dressed in black suits. They approached Jake with measured steps. "Sir, you'll need to leave." Jake looked at Emily, his eyes silently pleading for something, perhaps an explanation, perhaps just acknowledgement. But Emily turned away, clutching her white bouquet, her shoulders trembling ever so slightly. "Mr. Miller, please don't make this more difficult," one of the guards said stiffly. Jake bent down and picked up the soaked bracelet. He gently wiped it off, then lifted Lily into his arms. The child buried her face in his shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's all right, sweetheart, Jake," whispered his voice breaking. "Let's go home." His steps felt heavy as lead as he walked out. Eyes followed him from every direction, some curious, some contemptuous, some pitying. But no one spoke. The cathedral doors closed behind him, the bells still ringing. But to Jake, they no longer sounded like bells of blessing. They rang instead as a cruel truth. The soldier who had come home no longer had a place in this world. The rain began to fall as Jake led Lily away from the cathedral. Cold droplets struck his shoulders, soaking through the thin fabric of his military uniform, but he barely noticed. He held his young daughter tightly against his chest, shielding her from the rain. "Daddy, are we going home?" Lily asked softly, her small voice rising above the sound of the rain. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going back to our place." An old bus carried them through unfamiliar streets, moving farther and farther from the bustling city center. Glittering high-rise buildings gradually gave way to low-weathered structures with peeling paint and rusted signs. At last, they stopped in front of a 3-story boarding house tucked away down a narrow alley. The room was no more than about 100 square feet. There was an old iron bed, a rickety wooden table, and a wardrobe missing one of its doors. A small window faced the wall of the neighboring building, allowing sunlight to filter in for only a few hours each day. Jake set Lily down on the bed and used their only bath towel to dry her damp hair. The little girl sat still, her clear blue eyes fixed on her father with absolute trust. "Are you hungry?" Jake asked, forcing a cheerful tone. "I'm not hungry, Daddy." Lily shook her head. "But you should eat. You've gotten so thin." Tears welled up, but Jake quickly turned away, pretending to open the old mini-fridge in the corner of the room. Inside were only a carton of milk, 2 eggs, and half a loaf of bread. After Lily finished her milk and ate a slice of bread, Jake rocked her to sleep. He softly sang a lullaby his own mother used to sing. Lily drifted off her small hand, still clutching the now dry knitted bracelet. Jake tucked her in, then sat down on the wooden chair beside the table. As the night grew deeper, the rain fell harder. Water leaked through the damaged roof, dripping steadily into a corner of the room. Jake placed a plastic bucket beneath it, the sound of dripping water echoing like the ticking of time. He opened his worn military backpack. Inside, among old clothes and a few faded photographs, he found a brown envelope. Jake's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were legal documents papers concerning the small house he and Emily had bought before he was deployed. A modest 2-bedroom home in the suburbs with a small yard where Lily could play. But as he read each line, Jake felt his heart stop. Property transfer agreement, Emily Miller, seller, Richard Dawson, buyer, March 15th, March, 4 months before he had returned home. Emily had sold the house, the only home they had, while he was still on the battlefield, believing his family was waiting for him. The sale price, $150,000. And according to a handwritten note in the margin, the entire sum had been invested in the expansion project of Dawson Enterprises. Jake read the documents again and again, hoping his eyes had deceived him. But the bold print did not change. Emily's signature, the familiar handwriting he once loved, now felt like cuts across his heart. He slumped back in the chair, burying his face in his hands. Images flashed through his mind like a film reel. Emily smiling brightly the day they moved into the house, Lily taking her first unsteady steps across the warm wooden floor, quiet evenings spent together in the small living room. All of it was gone, not because of disaster, not because of circumstance, but because someone, the woman he had sworn to protect, had chosen a different path. Jake stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city was swallowed by heavy rain. Lights from distant buildings shimmered like stars, forever out of reach. He had fought to protect this country so families could live in peace. But what about his own family, Daddy? Lily's soft voice called out. Jake turned to see his daughter sitting up, her golden hair tousled around her small face. "Did I hear you crying?" Lily asked, her clear eyes filled with concern. "No, sweetheart. Daddy was just remembering some old things," Jake said quickly, wiping his tears as he moved to the bed. "Go back to sleep. It's still very late. Sleep with me." Daddy Lily lifted the blanket and scooted over. "There's plenty of room." Jake looked at his little girl, 5 years old, with a heart larger than the world itself. In Lily's eyes, he saw no judgment, no disappointment, only pure love and unwavering trust. He lay down beside her. Lily gently turned and placed her small hand on her father's chest. "Daddy, even though Mommy didn't take my present today, I'm still happy," Lily whispered. "Because I have you. You're the best daddy in the world." Clear tears rolled down Jake's cheeks, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of awakening. Yes, he had lost everything. No home, no possessions, no wife. But he still had what mattered most, a daughter who trusted him without condition. The rain continued through the night, but in that cramped little room, a small flame began to flicker in Jake Miller's heart. A resolve took shape. He would rise again, not for Emily, not for a world that had turned its back on him, but for the child sleeping peacefully in his arms. The cabin sat hidden behind a stand of old pine trees, 3 miles west of town. Jake found it through a small flyer taped to a utility pole, wooden cabin for rent. Cheap, no electricity, no running water. When they stepped inside for the first time, Lily stood quietly, taking it all in: the mold-stained wooden walls, the leaking roof, the cracked floorboards. An old wood-burning stove sat in the corner, its chimney pipe rusted. The windows had no glass, only rough wooden planks nailed in place. "Daddy, this is going to be our new home, isn't it?" Lily asked, her voice still bright as the morning sun. Jake knelt down to her level and gently brushed a streak of dust from her cheek. "That's right, sweetheart. This place is a little in need of repairs, but I promise you I'll turn it into the warmest home there is." And he kept his word. Every morning before sunrise, Jake woke up to split firewood, patch the roof, and seal the cracks in the walls. The calloused hands of a soldier now gripped hammer and saw each strike echoing like an unspoken vow he would rebuild from the ashes. But the town was not quick to forgive. Inside the Dawson mansion, crystal chandeliers cast brilliant light across the expansive living room. Emily sat on a red velvet sofa, her fingers trembling as she held a cup of Darjeeling tea. Richard stood by his oak desk, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. "Yes, that's right. Jake Miller, a former serviceman. I want you to make sure that not a single business in this town hires him. I don't want to see that face anywhere." Emily flinched. "Richard, you don't have to be quiet." "Emily," Richard's voice was cold as ice, "you chose this life. Don't let your past disgrace the Dawson family." He hung up and turned to her, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. "He dared to show up at the wedding and make a spectacle of himself in front of our guests. That is unacceptable." "But Lily, she just wanted to give her mother a gift." Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Lily will forget." "Children always do," Richard said dismissively, waving his hand. "What matters is that you forget. Jake Miller no longer exists in your life. Rumors spread like wildfire in a dry season. Jake Miller. That man's got problems. I heard he abandoned his wife and child, left Emily to raise the girl on her own. I heard Richard Dawson say Jake's buried in debt and caused trouble everywhere he went. A soldier like that who knows what bad habits he brought back from the battlefield. Jake heard those whispers every time he stepped into town. People looked at him as if he were a dangerous stranger. Shops that had once promised him work now shut their doors the moment they saw him coming. Even Thompson's woodworking shop, the place where he had pinned his hopes, turned him away. "I'm sorry, Miller," Mr. Thompson said, unable to meet Jake's eyes. "I've received certain information. I can't risk hiring someone with a complicated past." A complicated past, Jake repeated, his voice trembling with restraint. I served this country for 5 years, Mr. Thompson. I just want a job so I can feed my daughter. I understand, but Thompson turned away. I have a family to think about. I can't stand up to influential people. Jake walked out of the shop, his fists clenched. Inside him, the combat instincts of a soldier roared, urging him to confront, to fight back. But he forced himself to endure. For Lily. For the little girl waiting for him in the cabin. That evening, Jake and Lily sat by the wood stove. The small flame danced, warming the cold room. Jake showed his daughter how to shape scraps of wood into simple toys. Daddy, why are you home so late today? Lily asked carefully, holding a small piece of wood. I was looking for work, sweetheart, Jake said with a strained smile. But I haven't found the right job yet. Then do we have money to buy food? Daddy, Jake looked into his daughter's clear eyes, his heart tightening. Yes, we do. Daddy still has a little savings. We'll be all right. Lily nodded, then asked softly, Daddy, why don't people like you? Jake stopped what he was doing. He set the chisel down and turned to her. Who said that? I heard the grocery store lady talking to a customer, Lily said, lowering her head. She said, you're not a good person, but I know you're the best person there is. Why can't they see that? For a long moment, Jake said nothing. Then he placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his voice gentle but steady. Sweetheart, sometimes in this world, people don't look at the truth. They only see what others want them to see. Some people are wealthy, living in big, beautiful houses, but their hearts can be as small as a grain of sand. And some people are poor, living in a wooden cabin, but their hearts are as vast as the ocean. Then what does it mean to be rich or poor? Daddy Jake smiled, his eyes softening. Being rich isn't about having a lot of money. Being rich means not bowing to what's wrong. It means holding on to kindness when the world around you is full of cruelty. It means still believing in what's good even when everyone tells you to give up. Lily looked up at her father, her eyes shining. Then you're the richest person of all. Jake pulled her into his arms, clear tears rolling down his cheeks. And I'll teach you to be rich in that way too, no matter how much money we ever have. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the window. Inside the small cabin, the fire continued to burn, small but unextinguished. And in Jake Miller's heart, the flame of determination began to blaze brighter than ever before. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of the cabin on a late November afternoon. The engine shut off, the door opened, and Richard Dawson stepped out in a smoky gray Armani suit, his polished leather shoes catching the fading sunlight. Jake was outside chopping firewood. He stopped, sweat beading on his forehead, and watched the man approach with the bearing of someone who believed he owned the world. Miller, Richard called out, his voice as cold as a winter wind. We need to talk. Jake set the axe down. What do you want? Richard glanced around the cabin, the patched wooden walls, the roof that had been repaired but still sagged in places, the tall stack of firewood along the side of the house. A faint contemptuous smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. I'm here to make you an offer, Richard said, pulling a thick white envelope from his inner jacket pocket. An offer that benefits us both. I don't need anything from you, Jake replied flatly. Don't be so quick to refuse, Miller. Richard opened the envelope and took out a stack of checks, the name First National embossed prominently on them. $100,000. Enough for you to start over anywhere, another city, another state. A new life free of painful memories. All you have to do is leave this town, Richard said bluntly without hesitation, and leave Lily behind. Emily and I will raise her. She'll have the finest education and the best life things that you... He glanced around the cabin once more, his meaning unmistakable. Will never be able to provide. You think money can buy everything? Jake said, his voice trembling with restraint. Money doesn't buy everything, Richard replied calmly. But it buys opportunity. Good schools, good doctors, nice clothes, toys. Lily deserves those things, Miller. Can you look your daughter in the eye and tell her this wooden cabin is the best you can give her? Jake did not answer right away. Images flooded his mind. Lily shivering on cold winter nights, eating dry bread because there wasn't enough money for proper food growing up without the things other children had. "You love Lily, I understand," that Richard continued, his tone softening. "But love isn't enough. She needs a warm home, an education, a future. Do you want her to grow up in this cabin or in the Dawson mansion with every opportunity at her feet?" The words struck Jake with brutal precision. There was no violence in them, no threat, but they were crueler than anything he had faced on the battlefield, because they went straight to the deepest fear of every father: is love enough to make up for deprivation? "Think about Lily Miller," Richard said, extending the stack of checks toward him. "Don't let your pride destroy your daughter's future." Jake looked at the check's thin pieces of paper, yet heavy with the weight of an entire future. His hand reached out, almost touching them. Then it stopped. From inside the cabin came Lily's clear, joyful laughter. She was playing with the wooden animals Jake had carved for her, simple toys without bright colors or electronic sounds, but made with love. Jake withdrew his hand. He met Richard's eyes, his voice cold and steady. "Lily doesn't need your mansion or your money. She needs a father who's always there. And that's something your money can't buy." Richard frowned. "You're making a very big mistake, Miller." "No," Jake said, snatching the checks from Richard's hand. "You're the one who's mistaken. You think everything has a price, but the bond between a father and his child can't be priced." To Richard's shock, Jake tore the checks in half, then into quarters, then into eighths. The white fragments fluttered in the wind like lost butterflies falling to the ground among the dry leaves. "Get off my land," Jake said firmly. "And don't ever come back." Richard stood there for a moment, his face first pale, then flushed red. "You'll regret this, Miller. I promise you that. In this town, no one dares to stand against Richard Dawson." "Then I'll be the first," Jake replied. Richard turned and walked back to the Mercedes. Before getting in, he paused and said coldly, "Lily deserves a better life than this, Miller. One day she'll realize that. And when she does, don't blame anyone but yourself." The car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Jake stood still, watching it disappear, his hands still trembling. The torn pieces of the checks lay scattered on the ground, like a cruel reminder. $100,000 money that could have changed Lily's life, and money that would have cost a father his soul. Jake turned back toward the cabin. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her small wooden bear, her clear eyes filled with concern. "Daddy, who was that?" Jake knelt down and pulled her into his arms. No one important sweetheart, just someone who lost his way. Lily hugged him back gently. "Daddy, I don't need expensive things. I just need you." Clear tears rolled down Jake's cheeks, but this time they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of strength of a father who had chosen the harder path, but the right one. That night inside the small cabin, the fire in the wood stove burned warmly. Jake held Lily close and told her a story about a brave knight who feared neither dragons nor darkness, but feared only losing the most precious thing of all, his true heart. And Lily fell fast asleep in her father's arms, a peaceful smile resting on her lips. 5 years passed like a quiet stream slipping through a narrow rock crevice. The wooden cabin was no longer as rickety as it had been in the beginning. Jake had repaired every corner, replacing the roof, installing new window panes, getting the wood stove to work smoothly again. Out front, there was now a small garden where Lily grew daisies and cherry tomatoes. Lily was 10 years old now, taller, her golden blonde hair falling to her shoulders, her blue eyes still as clear as they had been when she was little. She attended the town's public school, riding an old bicycle 3 miles to class each morning. Every afternoon, she rode home to help her father split firewood, water the garden, and do her homework by the light of an oil lamp. Jake was still working as a freelance carpenter, odd jobs no one else wanted, fixing broken chairs, building simple bookshelves. The income was just enough to cover their modest needs, but they had each other, and that mattered more than anything else. One morning in early May, Lily woke up earlier than usual. She quietly took out her old box of watercolors, the birthday gift Jake had bought her the year before, and a clean sheet of drawing paper from her notebook. "Where are you going, sweetheart?" Jake asked as he prepared a simple breakfast of eggs and bread. "My school is holding a drawing contest today," Daddy Lily said, her cheeks flushing. "I want to enter." Jake paused and turned to her. "A drawing contest? You didn't tell me about this, because I was afraid you'd worry," Lily said softly, lowering her head. "The theme is my home. I know you've done your very best, but I was afraid people might laugh when they see me draw our cabin." Jake knelt down and gently lifted her chin. "Lily, never be ashamed of our home. We built it with love. That's what matters most." "I know," Daddy Lily smiled, her eyes lighting up, "and I'm going to show everyone that." The town hall glowed under the Saturday afternoon lights. The 10th annual Children's Art Competition was held with great ceremony, featuring nearly 100 students from across the region. The judges were well-known artists from a major city. Jake stood at the back of the hall, wearing his only white shirt, washed and pressed with care, and a clean pair of blue jeans. He felt out of place among the elegantly dressed parents in tailored suits and fashionable dresses. Emily was there too. She sat in the front row beside Richard, her blonde hair neatly pinned up, an elegant Chanel dress draped over her frame. 5 years had added faint lines around her eyes, but her beauty remained. On stage, the drawings were presented one by one. Children had painted grand mansions, luxury cars, seaside resorts. Each piece was met with enthusiastic applause from parents. Then it was Lily's turn. She walked onto the stage, small in her simple white dress, stitched and mended by Jake from an old shirt. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her painting on the easel. The hall fell silent. The painting showed no mansion, no luxury car. It depicted a modest wooden cabin, slightly crooked, with a slanted roof and small windows. Yet the entire cabin was bathed in a warm golden glow, like sunlight, like firelight, like love. In front of the cabin stood a tall man with his arms spread wide, as if shielding the whole world. Beside him, a little girl held his hand, a radiant smile on her face. Beneath the painting were handwritten words, slightly slanted. "A home with Dad is a real home." Lily stepped up to the microphone, her voice soft but steady. "I painted my home. It isn't as big as my friends' houses, and it doesn't have lots of expensive toys. But it has my dad, the person who's always there when I need him, who taught me that being rich doesn't mean having a lot of money, but having a warm heart. I think that's what a real home is." The hall remained silent. Then, from the middle rows, one clap rang out. Then, 2, 3, 10. Soon the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. Jake stood at the back, covering his face with both hands. Clear tears streamed through his fingers, not tears of sorrow, but tears of awakening. For 5 years he had wondered whether he had done the right thing, whether poverty had hurt Lily. Now the answer was as clear as dawn. He had built a home not with bricks and mortar, but with love and perseverance. The judges stepped onto the stage. The head judge, a silver-haired man, took the microphone. "In 50 years of work, I've seen thousands of paintings. Rarely have I seen one that touches the heart like this. Lily Miller has not only painted a house, she's painted the meaning of the word family." First prize goes to her. Applause surged like a rising tide. Lily accepted the golden trophy, her eyes searching the crowd. When she spotted Jake, she lifted the trophy high, her smile shining like the sun. Jake wiped his tears and waved back at his daughter. In the elegant hall, amid glances that once held contempt and now held respect, he felt something extraordinary take place. He was no longer an outcast. He was a father, a man who had built the most precious thing of all, trust and love in his child's heart. Emily sat silently staring at the painting. Tears rolled down her cheeks, tears of regret. 5 years earlier, she had chosen the mansion over the cabin. Now, seeing the happiness in Lily's eyes, she wondered whether she had chosen wrong. Richard sat beside her, his face pale. He applauded along with everyone else, but in his eyes was the helplessness of someone realizing that money cannot buy genuine love. After the award ceremony, Lily ran down and wrapped her arms tightly around her father. "Daddy, I won," Jake hugged her back, his voice breaking. "I knew you would because you painted from your heart." Hand in hand, they walked outside, the golden trophy gleaming in the sunset. Behind them, applause still echoed through the hall. And in Jake Miller's heart, the flame of faith, nearly extinguished so many times before, now burned brilliantly like the golden light in Lily's painting. The newspaper lay on the elegant dining table of the Dawson mansion, its front page emblazoned with a bold headline, "A painting that moved the heart. A 10-year-old girl redefines the meaning of family." Emily held her espresso cup, her hand trembling as she stared at the large photograph Lily standing beside her painting, holding a golden trophy, a radiant smile lighting up her small face. Nearby, Jake stood a short distance away, wearing a simple white shirt, his eyes filled with pride as he looked at his daughter. A home with Dad is a real home. Emily read the words again and again, one by one, hoping their meaning might somehow change. But it didn't. "Why are you reading that?" Richard's voice came from the head of the long dining table. "It's just some insignificant children's contest." Emily didn't answer. She set the coffee cup down and gently traced Lily's image with her finger. The face of her daughter changed by 5 years yet, with the same clear blue eyes as when she was little. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, his tone firmer now. "Nothing," Emily said as she stood up, carefully folding the newspaper. "I'm going upstairs for a bit." The master bedroom of the mansion was larger than the entire cabin where Jake and Lily lived. A king-size bed with Egyptian silk sheets, a walnut wardrobe filled with designer dresses, a balcony overlooking a 2-acre rose garden. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. Emily sat in the velvet armchair by the window and opened the newspaper again. The article was long, detailing Lily's life. A little girl living in a small cabin with her father, no computer, no television, but a treasure trove of hand-drawn comics and wooden animals carved by her dad. "Lily Miller told us that her father is her hero," the reporter wrote, "not because he has money, but because he is always there for her. Every night he tells her stories. Every morning he makes her breakfast. And when she cries, he holds her until she smiles again." Emily closed her eyes as memories flooded back. Jake cradling newborn Lily in his arms, singing softly through sleepless nights when the baby cried. Jake waking up early to bake a homemade birthday cake for his daughter, even though he barely knew how to cook. Jake running after Lily as she learned to walk, arms outstretched, ready to catch her whenever she stumbled. She had missed all of it. For 5 years, she had lived in a luxurious mansion, attended high society parties, shopped in exclusive boutiques. But she hadn't heard her daughter's laughter. She hadn't watched Lily grow up day by day. A clear tear fell onto the newspaper, blurring the word Dad. Emily wiped it away quickly, but the tears kept coming. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the painting. It haunted her, the warm golden light enveloping the cabin, the father's arms spread wide in protection, Lily's joyful smile. One Friday afternoon, while Richard was away on business, Emily quietly drove the BMW out of the mansion. She followed the winding road toward the forest, her heart pounding in her chest. The cabin appeared beyond the pine trees. Emily parked about 50 yards away, hiding behind thick bushes. From there, she could clearly see the front yard. Jake was chopping firewood, the muscles in his arms taut. 5 years had etched deeper lines around his eyes, but his face still bore the resolve of a soldier. Lily sat on the wooden steps, reading a book, occasionally looking up to smile at her father. "Daddy, the book says shooting stars can make wishes come true," Lily called out. "Does it?" Jake paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you believe that I do?" Lily nodded eagerly. "Tonight I'm going to sit outside and watch the stars. I want to make a wish." "What will you wish for, sweetheart?" Lily was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "I want to wish that you'll always be healthy, Daddy, so you can stay with me forever." Jake set the axe down and pulled his daughter into a hug. I wish for that too, sweetheart. Emily sat in the car, both hands covering her mouth to stifle a sob. The scene before her, simple, humble, yet overflowing with love, was utterly different from the life she lived in the Dawson mansion. She thought of dinner the night before. Richard sat at the head of the table, absorbed in his phone, not speaking a word to her. The maid served an elegant meal, but Emily ate alone, in silence, the clink of silverware against porcelain sounding like an alarm bell. After dinner, Richard went to his study. She went to the bedroom. They lived under the same roof like two separate planets, never touching. That wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement. Watching Jake and Lily laugh together, Emily felt a sharp pain in her heart. 5 years ago, she had believed she needed a mansion, luxury cars, and beautiful clothes to be happy. Now she realized she needed only the simplest thing of all, a real family. But was it too late? Jake and Lily went inside the cabin. The faint glow of an oil lamp shone through the small window. From a distance, Emily could hear Lily singing a cheerful song about spring and blooming flowers. Emily started the car and drove back to the mansion, but the entire way the image of the father and daughter lingered in her mind, a cruel reminder of what she had lost. That night, Emily lay on the soft silk bed staring at the high ceiling. Richard slept soundly beside her, the steady breathing of a man with no regrets. But Emily could not sleep. Had she been wrong to leave Jake, she wondered? Had she traded real happiness for a glittering facade? A small spark of hope flickered in her heart, a hope of redemption, of reclaiming what she had lost. But she didn't know where to begin, or whether Jake and Lily would ever accept her back. Outside the window, the sky was filled with stars. A shooting star streaked across the darkness, but Emily didn't make a wish. Because she knew some things cannot be wished for. They must be rebuilt day by day, hour by hour, with sincerity and love. And she had lost 5 years to do just that. A gray sedan pulled up in front of the cabin on an early June morning. A man in a black suit stepped out, a leather briefcase slung over his shoulder, his expression stern, the look of a court official. Jake was repairing the fence in the yard. He set the hammer down and walked over to meet him. "Mr. Jake Miller," the man asked. "Yes, that's me. I'm an officer of the county court. Please sign to acknowledge receipt of these documents." He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase stamped with an official red seal. Jake took the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. Something was wrong. He could sense it from the look of sympathy in the officer's eyes. "Good luck, Mr. Miller," the man said quietly before turning back to his car. Jake tore the envelope open. A stack of dense legal papers fell into his hands. The bold heading at the top read, "Petition for Custody Dispute. Petitioner Richard Dawson. Respondent Jake Miller." Jake's heart seemed to stop. He scanned the dry legal language in disbelief. The petitioner, Richard Dawson, requests that the court grant him custody of the minor child Lily Miller, born March 15, 2019, based on the following evidence. 1. Birth certificate listing Richard Dawson as the father. 2. The current living conditions are inadequate for the child's development. 3. The petitioner possesses sufficient financial means and living conditions to provide the best possible life for the child. Jake turned to the next page. Attached was a copy of a birth certificate, an official document from the Civil Registry Office stamped in red, bearing the unmistakable line, "Father's name, Richard Dawson." "No, this can't be." Jake shook his head, his voice breaking. "This is forged." He flipped through the rest of the papers. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs of the rundown cabin reports, detailing Jake's low income statements from townspeople, describing Lily's difficult circumstances, even photos of Lily wearing worn clothes and riding an old bicycle to school. Everything had been meticulously compiled, presented as irrefutable proof of one conclusion: Jake Miller was unfit to raise his child. Jake's hand tightened around the papers, his knuckles turning white. For 5 years he had raised his daughter with sweat and tears. He rose before sunrise, went to bed only after Lily fell asleep, worked tirelessly so she would have enough to eat and wear. And now a forged document could take everything away. Daddy, who was that Lily, stepped out of the cabin, her arms wrapped around a bouquet of daisies she had just picked from the garden. Jake quickly hid the papers behind his back and forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just the mailman. Aren't they pretty?" Daddy Lily held up the flowers, her smile bright as sunshine. "I picked them for you." Jake knelt down and took the bouquet from her. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." "Thank you." Lily kissed her father's cheek and ran back inside to find a vase. Jake stood still watching her, his chest tightening. A forged birth certificate, the court's powerful lawyers. Richard Dawson was using everything at his disposal to steal the only thing Jake had left his daughter. That afternoon, after Lily fell asleep for her nap, Jake drove his old pickup truck to the town's civil registry office. A 2-story red brick building with barred windows, the air inside heavy with the smell of damp paper. "I need to check my daughter's birth certificate," Jake said to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman wearing thick glasses. The child's name, Lily Miller, born March 15, 2019. The woman typed into her computer and frowned. "There are 2 records here." 2 records. Jake leaned closer to the screen. One original registration from 2019 listing the father as Jake Miller, and one amended record from 2020 listing the father as Richard Dawson. She looked at Jake over her glasses. "It appears there may be a legal dispute. 2020. That was when Jake was still deployed, when he trusted that Emily was caring for their daughter, when he had no idea a scheme was being woven behind his back. Who had the authority to amend this record?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "The mother may request an amendment if she has sufficient grounds." "In this case," the clerk flipped through the file. "Mrs. Emily Miller, now Emily Dawson, submitted the request along with documents from Morrison and Associates." Morrison and Associates, the city's most powerful law firm where Richard Dawson spent millions of dollars each year. Jake walked out of the building, his head spinning. Emily had been working with Richard all along. They had set this trap 5 years ago, waiting for the right moment to spring it. He climbed into the truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Something was awakening inside him, not blind rage, but the cold, focused resolve of a soldier. For 5 years he had endured. He had accepted every insult, every hardship, hoping to avoid conflict so Lily could grow up in peace. But now they wanted to take his child. That was unacceptable. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Jake sat at the old wooden table, the faint glow of an oil lamp beside him. He opened his aging laptop, the only thing left from his former life, and began searching. Custody law, forged birth certificates, how to fight back in court. Every website told him the same thing. He needed a lawyer. He needed money. He needed solid evidence, things Jake didn't have. But he had something else, the truth. And over the past 5 years, he had built the most valuable thing of all, his daughter's love and trust. Jake opened a drawer and took out an old tin box. Inside were photographs, pictures from Lily's birth photos of him holding her in the hospital, the original birth certificate clearly bearing the name Jake Miller. He picked up his phone and dialed the one number he knew might help, the legal aid office for veterans. "Hello, this is the Legal Assistance Hotline. My name is Jake Miller. I'm a former serviceman." Jake said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I need help. Someone is trying to take my daughter using forged documents, and I will fight to the very end to protect her." On the bed, Lily turned in her sleep, murmuring softly, "Daddy, I love you." Jake looked at his daughter, his gaze unwavering. In his chest, the heart of a soldier once forged on distant battlefields now beat fiercely for the most important fight of his life, a fight for family, a fight for love, a fight for the truth. And Jake Miller would not back down, even if it meant standing against the entire Dawson empire. The first court hearing took place on a sweltering July morning. The county courthouse was an old, stately building with white stone columns, its hallways echoing with footsteps on polished marble floors. Jake sat at the defendant's table, wearing the only suit he owned borrowed from the legal aid office. Beside him was his volunteer attorney, a young man named David, who had graduated only a few years earlier, his face still youthful, but his eyes filled with determination. Across the room sat Richard Dawson's legal team, 5 men in sleek black suits, leather briefcases neatly arranged on the table. Richard sat in the center, his expression cold, occasionally casting a look of open contempt toward Jake. Emily sat farther back behind the gallery seats. Her face was pale, her hands clenched tightly around her handbag, unable to look at anyone. The judge, a silver-haired man with a carefully trimmed beard, struck his gavel. Court is now in session. This is a custody dispute between Richard Dawson and Jake Miller. Richard's lead attorney stood a tall man named Harrison, his voice confident and commanding. Your Honor, we have clear evidence that Mr. Jake Miller is unfit to raise the child Lily Miller. To begin with, Mr. Miller's income over the past year was only $12,000. He lives in a cabin that fails to meet basic standards, and he provides no medical insurance for the child. He projected a series of photographs: an aging cabin, a rusted pickup truck, Lily's patched shoes. Jake sat silently, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Each image felt like a knife cutting into his dignity. In contrast, Harrison continued. Mr. Richard Dawson has a net worth of $200 million. He owns a substantial estate and can provide the child with the finest education and medical care. And most importantly, he raised a copy of a birth certificate. The official birth certificate clearly lists Richard Dawson as the father. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge frowned, looking down at the file. David, Jake's attorney, rose to his feet, his voice shaking. Your Honor, we have evidence that this birth certificate was fraudulently altered. The original certificate from 2019 clearly names Jake Miller as the father. We have a ruling from the registry office, Harrison interrupted. The amendment was lawful and requested by the child's mother, Mrs. Emily Dawson, with sufficient legal justification. Jake turned to look at Emily. She sat motionless, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling slightly. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Finally, the judge struck the gavel. The court will review the evidence carefully. This matter is adjourned for 2 weeks to allow additional information to be submitted. However, he looked at Jake, sympathy in his eyes. Based on what has been presented today, I advise Mr. Miller to consider what is truly in the best interest of the child. Those words felt like a death sentence. Jake walked out of the courthouse, his legs heavy as lead. David placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. They have money and a powerful legal team. But we haven't lost yet. We still have 2 weeks. Jake nodded, but deep down he knew 2 weeks were not enough to stand against the Dawson empire. That night Jake couldn't sleep. He sat outside the cabin staring up at the star-filled sky, dark thoughts circling his mind. If he went to the Dawson mansion, confronted Richard, forced him to withdraw the petition. Jake's hands clenched. On the battlefield he had faced brutal trials. He knew how to act decisively, forcefully. But this was not a battlefield. This was civilian life where violence solved nothing. Yet when his daughter was under threat, how could a father remain still? Jake stood up and went inside to grab his truck keys. He would go to the Dawson mansion right now. He would, Daddy, where are you going? Lily's gentle voice came from the bedroom doorway. Jake turned. Lily stood there in her white nightgown holding her wooden bear, her blue eyes filled with worry. You're awake, Jake said, forcing his voice to sound calm. I heard you walking outside, Lily said, stepping forward and taking his hand. Are you sad, Daddy? Jake knelt and hugged his daughter. Just a little, sweetheart. But it's all right, Daddy, Lily said softly. Yesterday at school, I heard people talking about the court case. They said someone wants to take me away from you. Jake's heart stopped. You heard that, yes, Lily nodded. But I'm not scared, because I know you'll protect me. You always taught me that good people win over bad people, right? That's right, sweetheart. And you also taught me that. Lily looked straight into his eyes, her voice clear as a silver bell. Dad is home, and home doesn't hurt people. Do you remember the words struck like lightning? Jake remembered it was when Lily was 5, when she asked why her father didn't use strength to force bad people to obey. He had answered, "Daddy is your home sweetheart. And home is a safe place. It doesn't hurt anyone." Now, his daughter was repeating those words to pull him back from the edge. Jake held Lily tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I remember, sweetheart. I remember." "Then please don't go do anything that would make me sad," Lily whispered. "I need you here with me." Father and daughter sat quietly beneath the stars. Jake felt his anger slowly fade, replaced by clarity. He couldn't defeat Richard by becoming someone like him. He had to find another way, a harder path, but the right one. The next morning, Jake's phone rang. An unfamiliar voice spoke. "Mr. Miller? This is Thomas, your old unit buddy. I heard about the court case. Is there anything I can do to help?" Jake was stunned. Thomas, the man who had once saved his life on a dangerous patrol, now a private investigator in a major city. "Thomas, thank you, but I don't have the money to hire an investigator." "Who said anything about money?" Thomas laughed. "Battlefield brothers, you've forgotten already. Send me everything you have on Richard Dawson. I'll see if he has any weak spots." A week later, Thomas called back, his voice excited. "Jake, you wouldn't believe it. Dawson isn't as clean as he looks. He's involved in a series of suspicious financial transactions, but I need more evidence from inside the company." That night, a brown envelope was left at the cabin door. There was no sender, only a shaky handwritten note. "I'm sorry for everything. This may help our daughter. E." Inside was a USB drive containing hundreds of documents, internal emails, confidential financial reports, proof of Richard's illegal money transfers, even plans outlining the falsification of the birth certificate back in 2020. Emily, she had chosen her daughter over her husband. Jake held the USB drive, his hands trembling. This was the weapon that could turn the tide. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, a gentle smile on her lips. The darkest night had passed. Dawn was close. Rain poured down on a late July morning, heavy drops striking the ground as if washing all the dust away. The sky was pitch-black thunder and lightning rumbling near and far. Jake was chopping firewood under the porch when he heard police sirens wailing in the distance. Not just one, but a whole convoy, 5 or 6 sleek black vehicles with flashing red and blue lights racing toward the center of town. He stopped and watched as the convoy disappeared around the bend. Something was happening. His phone rang. Thomas. "Jake, turn on the TV, local news. Hurry." Jake rushed into the cabin and switched on the old television he had bought from a second-hand shop. The screen flickered for a few seconds, then cut to a live broadcast from the Dawson mansion. "We are on the scene at the residence of Mr. Richard Dawson, where federal agents have just executed a search warrant." The reporter's voice came through the speakers. The screen showed the ornate wrought iron gate standing wide open. Dozens of agents wearing black jackets emblazoned with large yellow FBI letters poured inside. Richard Dawson, the man who had once stood so arrogantly in court, now looked pale and disheveled, his hair in disarray, as he staggered between 2 federal agents. "Mr. Dawson is facing charges of money laundering through overseas transactions, tax evasion, and falsification of legal documents," the reporter continued. "According to our sources, the investigation has been underway for months and has just reached a breakthrough following internal evidence." Jake stood motionless, staring at the screen. He felt no sense of triumph, no joy at victory, only relief, as though a massive burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. "Daddy, is that—" Lily stepped out of the bedroom, looking up at the screen. Jake quickly turned off the television. "It's nothing, sweetheart, just the news." That afternoon, the rain continued to fall. Jake was repairing the porch roof when he heard the sound of a car pulling into the yard. He looked out and saw a yellow taxi. The door opened and Emily stepped out. She wore a light coat, her hair soaked her face bare of its usual careful makeup. In her hand was a white envelope. Jake set the hammer down and stepped off the porch. The two of them stood facing each other in the rain, 5 years of tension hanging between them. Emily began, her voice trembling. I came to apologize. Jake said nothing. He simply stood there. I was wrong, Emily continued, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. I chose the wrong path. I thought money would bring happiness, but it was all an illusion. Richard never loved me. He only wanted control. And I lost the most important thing of all. She glanced toward the cabin where Lily stood at the window watching. Lily is happy with you, Emily said softly. She doesn't need a mansion or luxury cars. She just needs a father who loves her. And you've done that better than anyone. Jake swallowed hard. Is that all you came here to say? No? Emily held out the envelope. I came to give you full custody of Lily. These are the relinquishment papers. I've already signed them. I've also testified to the federal authorities about everything Richard did. The forged birth certificate will be annulled, and Lily will be officially registered as your daughter. Jake took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. Where will you go? I'll go back home, Emily said with a sad smile. Back to where I grew up before everything went wrong. I need time to find myself again, the Emily you once knew before I lost her to ambition. She looked toward the cabin one last time. Please tell Lily that her mother loves her, and one day when she's old enough to understand, I hope she can forgive me. Emily stepped into the taxi. Before closing the door, she added, Thank you, Jake. Thank you for being a good father. The taxi drove off into the rain, leaving Jake standing in the yard with the envelope in his hand. The rain kept falling, but the eastern sky had begun to brighten. That evening, after the rain stopped, Jake and Lily sat by the warm wood stove. The flames danced, crackling softly. Daddy, Mommy came, didn't she? Lily asked quietly. Jake nodded. Yes, sweetheart. Did she say anything? Jake took out the envelope, opened it, and read the letter inside Emily's trembling handwriting. My dear Lily, I know I wasn't there for you during the most important years of your life. I chose the wrong path, believing money and status would bring happiness. I was mistaken. True happiness is being with the people who love you. It's laughing, crying, and living every moment fully. And you have all of that with your father. I don't ask for your forgiveness now because I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know this, I love you. I always will. And I'm proud of the kind, brave, loving girl you've become. Hold on to that painting, the painting of a real home. Because you understood something it took me years to learn. Home is not a castle or a mansion. Home is where there is love. With all my love. Mom. Jake finished reading and set the letter down. Lily was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Daddy, I feel a little sad. But I understand, Mommy. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too. Right, Jake held his daughter close, his voice thick with emotion. That's right, sweetheart. Everyone can make mistakes. What matters is whether they realize it and try to make things right. So one day, can I see Mommy again? If you want to, and when you're ready, I'll help you, Jake promised. Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder, watching the fire. Daddy, it rained so hard today, but now everything feels cleaner. Like all the bad things were washed away. Jake smiled. You're right, sweetheart. It was a cleansing rain. It washed away what was wrong and left what is pure. So now we'll be happy forever, won't we, Daddy? We'll be happy, Jake replied. Not because everything is perfect, but because we have each other. And that's what matters most. Outside, a brilliant rainbow appeared in the post-rain sky, 7 colors arching over the pine forest, linking the small cabin to the distant horizon. A deep sense of peace filled Jake's heart, not the peace of a man who had won a battle, but the peace of someone who had weathered the storm and finally found safe harbor. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had prevailed. Snow fell softly on a late December afternoon, white flakes drifting through the air like butterflies blanketing rooftops, tree branches, and the road in a pristine layer of white. The community care center sat on the outskirts of town, a two-story building painted pale yellow with a small garden out front. Inside, children's laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the warm scent of freshly baked cookies. Emily stood at the reception desk, wearing a simple gray sweater, her hair neatly tied back. 6 months of volunteering there had changed her. Her face no longer carried layers of careful makeup. Her eyes were softer, her smile more genuine. She was organizing donated toys when the doorbell rang. A tall young girl stepped inside, her golden blonde hair falling freely, her face more mature than it had been 6 months earlier. Lily. Emily froze, her heart pounding. Mother and daughter looked at each other across a few short steps, a distance measured not in space but in time, pain, and letting go. "Hello, Mom," Lily said softly, her voice no longer trembling as it once had. "Lily," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. You came. I wanted to see you," Lily said as she stepped closer. "Dad told me that when I was ready, I could come. And today, I'm ready." Emily stepped out from behind the desk, her hands trembling. She wanted to embrace her daughter, but didn't dare, afraid Lily might still be hurting. Lily set her small backpack down and took out a square wooden box. She opened it to reveal 3 hand-knitted bracelets, blue, white, and pink, woven together into a single braid. "I made these," Lily said, holding them up. "Dad taught me how to knit, and I made 3 bracelets. The blue one is for Dad with the letter J, the white one is for Mom with the letter E, and the pink one is for me with the letter L." Emily stared at the 3 intertwined bracelets, each stitch careful and deliberate. Tears welled up, impossible to hold back. "I braided them together," Lily continued, "because I think that even if we don't live in the same house, we're still a family. Dad always taught me that family isn't a perfect place. It's a place where people keep loving each other no matter what happens." You're not angry with me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Lily was quiet for a moment, then answered honestly. "I was sad. I wondered why you weren't with me. But Dad told me that people can lose their way sometimes. What matters is whether they find their way back. And you did the right thing when you helped Dad protect me." Emily knelt down to Lily's level, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, for choosing wrong, for letting you grow up without me." "You don't need to say sorry anymore," Lily said gently. "You just need to be here. Here in my heart." She handed Emily the white bracelet, the one marked with the letter E. "This one is yours. I want you to keep it so you'll remember that no matter where we are, we're always connected." Emily trembled as she took the bracelet and slipped it onto her wrist. The yarn was soft and warm, like her daughter's small hand holding hers. "Thank you, Lily." "Thank you so much," Emily said as she embraced her daughter. For the first time in 6 years, mother and child held each other not in perfection, but in forgiveness. Outside the window, Jake stood beneath a snow-laden tree. He watched as mother and daughter embraced, tears and smiles, sharing the same space on their faces. A deep, complete sense of peace filled his heart, not the peace of someone who had won a battle, but the peace of a man who had found the true meaning of life. He didn't need Emily to return to him. He didn't need revenge. He only needed Lily to be happy. And if his daughter's happiness included having her mother in her life, then he was willing to open his arms and welcome it. Emily looked out the window and met Jake's gaze. She nodded gently, a nod filled with gratitude, apology, and acknowledgement. Jake smiled and raised his hand in a quiet wave. Then he turned and walked away through the snow, leaving space for mother and daughter. The snow fell heavier, covering his footprints along the path. Yet in Jake's heart, the road ahead had never been clearer. That evening, Lily returned to the cabin with the pink bracelet on her wrist and a bright smile on her face. Jake was cooking dinner, a warm chicken soup with homemade bread. "Dad, I saw Mom today," Lily said as she sat at the table. She cried a lot, but they were happy tears. Jake smiled as he ladled soup into a bowl. "I know, sweetheart. I'm very proud of you for being brave enough to open your heart. Are you angry with Mom? Jake sat down across from his daughter, looking into her clear blue eyes. I was once, but not anymore. I understand now that holding on to anger only hurts the person who carries it, so I chose forgiveness, not because your mother deserves it, but because you and I deserve to live in peace. Lily nodded, then raised her wrist to show off the pink bracelet. CJEL, we're all here, even if we don't live in the same house. Jake raised his own wrist, the blue bracelet with the letter J glinting softly in the lamplight. And I'll always keep it close as a reminder that family isn't a perfect place. It's a place that always leaves the door open for love to return. So we're happy now, aren't we, Dad? Lily asked. We've always been happy, sweetheart, Jake replied. Even when things were hardest, we still had each other. And that's real happiness, not something decided by circumstances, but by what our hearts choose. Father and daughter ate dinner in a warm, comfortable silence. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the pine forest, the road, and the small cabin. Inside, the fire in the wood stove burned brightly, warming both the room and their hearts. On the table, the 3 bracelets JEL lay side by side in the soft lamplight symbols of a family once broken, now finding its way back together in its own way through forgiveness and love. And in the heart of Jake Miller, a soldier who had fought on distant battlefields and on the battlefield of life, the final war had come to an end. Not with guns or violence, but with love. Not with overwhelming victory, but with forgiveness and letting go. And that, above all else, was the greatest victory a human being could ever achieve. The story of Jake and Lily is a quiet yet powerful reminder that what truly makes a father and a steady, honorable human being is not money or victory, but the choice to stay when things become hardest, to stay and love, to stay and protect, to stay so that a child knows they will always have a home. If this story touched you, follow along to continue sharing in stories about family kindness and the strength of perseverance. Share it with those you love, because somewhere out there may be a Jake who needs a little more faith and a Lily who needs someone to stand guard for them. And if you are walking through uncertain days, please remember, you are not alone. You are not weak for choosing love. And sometimes simply choosing to stay is already the beginning of change.